You're not addicted to your phone, you're avoiding yourself. Carl Jung observed that human beings will do almost anything, no matter how absurd, to escape an honest meeting with their own depths. As Jung wrote in Collected Works Volume 12, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls. And Jung would stop you right there and say, do you see it? The compulsion was never really about the object. Whether it was drink in his Vienna or a glowing rectangle in your pocket, the object is only ever the dressing on a wound the person has not yet dared to look at. And that is the ache underneath tonight's title. You pick up the phone 40 times a day, not because the phone is so interesting, but because the alternative, the bare, unguarded minute with yourself, feels unbearable. And something in you already knew that before I said it. And I want to say plainly that you are not the only one who feels this. Sit in any waiting room, any train car, any kitchen at 9 in the evening, and you will find the same bright light held in the same slightly averted face. This is not a private shame. It is a shared condition of the age, and naming it together is the first mercy this teaching can offer you. So here is a small, honest reckoning before we go further. I stopped scrolling long enough to notice the quiet ache underneath the habit. I let myself feel the emptiness instead of reaching past it for the next bright distraction. I turn my attention toward the very thing I have been avoiding. And this turning has a name. Jung gave it. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. And again, I make the unconscious conscious. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, consider staying subscribed so tomorrow's teaching finds you the same way this one did. And before we go any further, if something in you just went quiet while I said that, type the 2 words "face it" in the comments. Let it be your seal on what follows. The first key is that the phone is not the disease, it is the dressing. Jung taught that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, and what he meant was strange and kind at once. He meant that some pain is owed, that it belongs to you, that it is the honest cost of being a particular person with a particular history, and when you refuse to pay that debt, the psyche does not simply cancel it, it finds you a cheaper substitute, suffering to occupy the space instead. The restless thumb, the 23rd refresh of a page that has not changed, the low hum of anxiety that never quite resolves into a thought you can name, none of that is nothing. It is legitimate suffering wearing a disguise it can afford. Think of a woman who feels a flicker of grief pass through her chest while washing the dishes. Grief for a friendship that quietly faded years ago and was never properly mourned. And instead of letting that flicker finish its sentence, she dries her hands and reaches for the phone on the counter. The flicker does not vanish. It only goes underground, and what surfaces instead is a low restlessness she cannot place. A mild irritability at her husband for something small, a tiredness that sleep does not seem to touch. That is the substitute suffering, doing its cheap and endless work, standing in for the one honest grief she has not yet let herself feel. And once you see the phone this way, you stop asking the wrong question. You stop asking, how do I use this thing less? And you start asking, what debt am I refusing to pay? What feeling is waiting in the very silence I keep interrupting? The debt itself, like any debt left unpaid, does not stay the same size. It gathers its own quiet interest. A small, unfelt sadness, left alone for a year, becomes something heavier and harder to name by the time you finally sit with it, which is one more reason the noticing matters now, rather than later. Think also of a man who lost his father 3 winters ago and has never once let himself cry about it properly. The grief did not disappear simply because he was busy. It went looking for a lower-cost outlet, and it found one in the 2 hours a night he now spends reading arguments between strangers online, none of which concern him, all of which give his mind somewhere frantic to be other than the one place it actually needs to go. I do not fight the habit. I ask what it is standing in for. The second key is that this is not a new sickness. It is an old flight, wearing a new shoe. Jung spoke of what he called the general neurosis of our age, decades before anyone carried a screen in their pocket. In a 1959 broadcast for the BBC, he said plainly that man cannot stand a meaningless life, and he saw it in his consulting room long before television or the phone in your hand. Patience with every outward success, position, marriage, income, health, who came complaining only that nothing meant anything anymore. He called it the senselessness and aimlessness of their lives, and it did not respond to advice or willpower, only to the discovery of one thread of meaning already running through the person's own days. He did not send these people away with a prescription for busyness. He sent them looking for the thread already available and simply unattended. And the same principle holds now with a screen in every pocket. The outer conditions of a life can look entirely in order, while the inner conversation with oneself has gone silent for years. The busier the surface looks, the easier that silence is to miss. So picture the same ache moving through the generations before yours, wearing whatever coat the century offered it. Your grandmother filled her evenings with a radio serial she did not even like, just to keep the silence from speaking. Your father kept the newspaper open long after he had finished reading it, not for the news, but for the shield. A neighbor talked an hour on the telephone about nothing at all, and in every one of those rooms, the same flight was happening, the same soul turning from the same unmet question. Only the object in the hand was different. None of them were the sickness, all of them were the dressing, which means you did not invent your own avoidance. You inherited its shape, and were simply handed a faster instrument to perform it with. Go back further still, before radios and newspapers, and you find the same flight in endless card games, endless gossip at the well, small rituals of busyness invented for no purpose except to keep a person from sitting alone with an unanswered question about their own life. The century changes the costume, the soul underneath K. The third key is the one that will not let you off easily. So walk through an ordinary day with me and watch where the phone actually lands. You wake, and before your feet touch the floor, the thumb is already moving. That is the first crack of silence, sealed before it can even open its eyes. You sit down to coffee, and the moment the cup is poured, the other hand reaches for the screen. That is the second crack sealed. You ride the elevator, 12 seconds of nothing, sealed. You stand in a line at the store, 40 seconds of nothing, sealed. You wait for a kettle to boil. You wait for a friend who is running late. You wait at a red light with nothing to do but sit inside your own mind for 90 seconds. And each of these you fill without even deciding to. The hand simply moves, as if some quiet arrangement had already been made behind your back. And by the time you lie down at night, exhausted, instead of letting the exhaustion simply be, the thumb moves once more before sleep, sealed again. Now count what you actually avoided across that day. Not entertainment you missed, but silence. The elevator silence where a stray memory might have surfaced. The line at the store silence where a worry about your marriage, or your father, or your own drifting purpose might have quietly announced itself. The red light silence where an old regret sits patiently waiting for 90 seconds of your attention. The bedtime silence, where the day's disappointments might have finally caught up with you and asked to be felt. Imagine a man riding the same train home every evening, 40 minutes of open track, and for years he fills every one of those minutes with the small bright glow in his hand. Until one evening the battery dies somewhere past the third stop, and for the remaining 30 minutes he simply sits, and by the second stop after that, a thought rises in him unbidden. A plain thought about how long it has been since he called his brother. A thought that had apparently been standing at that particular door for months, waiting for him to leave it unlocked. This is what Jung meant by the soul finding you. Not through announcement, but through the smallest unguarded gap you forget to seal. And he would have called every one of those gaps a doorway. Not a large dramatic doorway with a name and a warning sign. Just a crack, ordinary and easy to miss. And the psyche does not need much more than a crack to press something up into awareness, if you let it sit open, even a moment longer than usual. And if you tally not one day but a whole ordinary week lived this way, you arrive at something almost frightening in its plainness. Dozens of these small doors sealed, dozens of these brief openings closed before anything could pass through them, so that a week can go by, and when someone asks you what you have been thinking about lately, you find you honestly do not know. Not because nothing was there, but because nothing was ever given the 2 or 3 unguarded minutes it needed to rise all the way into words. Consider too the small door of the bathroom mirror, 30 seconds most mornings, where a person once might have caught their own eyes and wondered, plainly, how they are actually doing, now filled instead with a glance downward at the same small screen, and the eyes in the mirror go unmet for another day. This is why the habit is so well designed against you. It is not one long indulgence you could interrupt with a single burst of resolve. It is 100 small door closings a day, each one so brief and so automatic you barely notice the door was there at all, let alone that you just shut it. And so the real work is not the dramatic resolution to quit the phone for a month. It is the far smaller and stranger discipline of noticing the door itself, catching your own hand mid-reach, and asking, just once, what was standing on the other side of this particular silence? I want you to notice, just once today, the exact moment your hand moves toward the phone inside a silence, and ask what that silence was about to hand you before you closed it. I stop sealing every crack of silence before I know what lives inside it. The fourth key is the split Jung insisted on, between sterile suffering and fertile suffering. And it matters here because not all discomfort is the same discomfort. Sterile suffering is the ache of avoidance itself, the restlessness, the low static of guilt, the flat mood after another evening lost to scrolling. It produces nothing, it only repeats. The same debt collected again tomorrow with nothing to show for the payment. Fertile suffering is different. It is the ache that comes when you actually sit with what the phone was covering, the loneliness finally felt, the grief about a friendship that quietly ended. That kind of pain is not pleasant either, but it moves, it has direction. Imagine a man home from work, his marriage quietly cooling for months, though neither has said so. He feels a faint pressure rise in his chest and opens the phone before it can form into a thought. 40 minutes pass. He has watched other people's arguments and other people's vacations, and when he sets it down, the pressure has not moved an inch, only joined now by a small shame at having proven again that he still will not look. That is sterile suffering compounding on sterile suffering. Now imagine instead, he lets the pressure rise all the way and thinks the plain sentence, "We have stopped really talking." That sentence hurts more sharply for a moment, but it is fertile, because it can lead somewhere. Picture 2, a young man who feels a familiar tightening in his chest each evening, and answers it for months with an hour of clips that are not his own. The tightening returns each night unmoved, but the evening he opens a plain notebook and writes one honest sentence about what the tightening seems to be about. Something in the chest loosens slightly, simply because it was finally given a shape. That loosening, however small, is the mark of fertile suffering. Jung's whole argument was that modern life keeps handing people sterile suffering dressed up as relief, when the soul actually needs the fertile kind, even though it costs more up front. And fertile suffering rarely announces itself. It looks like one plain sentence written quietly, not a dramatic reckoning. So here is the plain test. You can run on yourself this week. After an hour of scrolling, do you feel emptier, or does something in you feel more resolved? If emptier, that was sterile, avoidance paying interest on a debt it never touched. And if you noticed even a flicker of clarity, a name for a feeling, a decision quietly forming, that was fertile, and it is worth more than the hour it cost. I stop mistaking numbness for peace. The fifth key is the deepest one, and I want to walk it in 5 pieces so none of it slides past you unfelt. First, consider what you are actually avoiding when the phone rises to your hand. It is rarely one dramatic thing. It is usually a low current of doubt about whether your life is adding up to anything. And Jung named this exact current the senselessness and aimlessness that brings people into a consulting room even when nothing has technically gone wrong. He wrote that the least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. From Modern Man in Search of a Soul. And notice what that sentence claims. It does not ask for a grand purpose. It says one small true thread of meaning outweighs an entire day of the meaningless kind, which means the phone is not competing with some enormous calling you have failed to find. It is competing with something far smaller and more available than that, and mostly winning. Second, consider why the competition is so lopsided. Meaning takes time to arrive. It does not announce itself in half a second, the way a notification does. You must sit in some unrewarded silence before a thread of meaning can surface at all. And against a machine engineered to reward you every half second, an activity that pays out only after 10 unrewarded minutes will lose almost every time willpower alone defends it. And there is a further unfairness worth naming. The phone was built by rooms full of clever people whose entire task was to win exactly this contest against your attention. Meaning has no such department working for it. Meaning has only the quiet patience of an old shy thing waiting at the tree line. So when you lose this contest most evenings, you are not losing to your own weakness, so much as to an opponent built for exactly this purpose. And knowing that does not remove the ache, but it removes some of the harshness you are entitled to spare yourself. Third, think of it this way. Meaning behaves like a shy animal at the edge of a clearing. It will not step forward while something louder is moving in the foreground. The instant the bright rectangle lights your face, it retreats back into the trees. This is why an hour of scrolling can feel afterward like time that did not happen. No thread was allowed to approach in all that noise. And here is the mercy hidden in the same image. The shy animal needs nothing dramatic from you. Only an ordinary 10 minutes, with nothing filling them. Which means the very thing that feels hardest, the empty, unfilled stretch, is exactly what meaning was waiting for. This is a particular kind of poverty Jung took seriously. Not the poverty of having too little, but the poverty of a life so thoroughly filled that nothing quiet is ever allowed to arrive in it. Fourth, imagine an ordinary evening, the dishes done, the house quiet, one small, unfinished thing sitting at the edge of your mind, a letter you meant to write, or the honest question of how you feel about the week now closing. You sit down meaning to face it, and the phone is resting on the arm of the chair, and your hand finds it before the question has even formed. An hour passes, then another, and when you set it down, the unfinished thing is still there, only joined now by a faint disappointment you cannot quite name. Or picture a man recently retired, mornings once claimed by work now standing open in front of him, and rather than sit inside that new spaciousness even briefly, he fills it with the same glowing rectangle he carried through 40 working years. The mornings were never truly empty. They were full of a question he had no time to ask before, namely, what he wants his remaining days to be for, and it is still standing at the tree line each morning, waiting for the noise to stop. Or picture a woman in a waiting room before a dreaded appointment. 40 minutes to sit with a real question about her own health, and for 39 of them the phone is out, and when her name is called, she still does not know what she feels, only that the 40 minutes are gone. Or picture a parent at the edge of a child's bed after the light is out, a natural pause that once might have held a quiet thought about how fast the child is growing, filled instead by one last glance at the screen before rising to leave. None of these are dramatic on their own, and that is exactly the point. The avoidance never arrives as a crisis. It arrives as a habit so small and reasonable that it never once asks permission. Fifth, and this is the piece I most want you to sit with, pause for a moment and pick one real hour from your last few days that you spent mostly on the phone, and ask honestly what you would have had to feel if the phone had not been there. Name it plainly. Was it boredom? A specific worry about someone you love? The flat suspicion that your work does not matter? Grief for a version of your life that did not happen? Whatever surfaces, do not rush to fix it. Just let it have a name for a moment. This is what Jung called the least of things with a meaning, not a cured problem, only a named one. And here is the turn I want to make plainly. It is easy to nod along picturing some more distracted friend, some relative glued to a screen. But I am speaking about you, about the hour you just named, about the ache that surfaces the moment your hand is empty. You are not watching this from a safe distance. You are the case study. And that is not an insult. It is simply where the real work has always lived, not in the general theory of modern distraction, but in your own particular avoided hour, the letter still unwritten, the question still unasked, the shy animal still waiting at the edge of a clearing you have not once left quiet long enough to enter. I let the shy animal approach before I fill the clearing again. The sixth key is the smallest and the warmest, and it is simply this. You do not need to defeat the phone. You only need to build one clearing a day, quiet enough for the shy animal to enter. Jung was never in the business of grand overnight transformations. He trusted small, honest repetitions, far more than dramatic resolutions. So pick one ordinary moment tomorrow, the coffee before anyone else in the house is awake, the walk to the mailbox, the 3 minutes after you park the car, but before you go inside, and simply leave the phone where it is. Do not perform silence as a discipline. Do not treat it like a test to pass. Just let the moment be as empty as it actually is, and see what rises in it. Most days, very little will rise, and that is fine. The animal does not come every time it is invited. Some days a small thought will surface, a name, a decision, a sentence you did not know you were carrying, and you will recognize it immediately, because it will feel different from anything the scrolling ever gave you. It will feel like your own. Think of it less as a rule and more as an offering. One small, unfilled clearing set out each day, the way you might leave a window cracked open on a warm evening, without knowing exactly what air will come through it. Some evenings nothing does. Some evenings everything changes because of it, and either way you have kept faith with the one practice Jung actually asked of anyone. Not perfection, not withdrawal from the modern world, only the willingness to notice, again and again, the moment the hand reaches for the escape, and to let it pause there just long enough to ask what it was really reaching away from. I leave one clearing open today, and I do not fill it. Here is the whole picture. The phone was never the disease, it was the dressing on a debt still owed. The debt is not new, it is the same old flight in a faster shoe. The day is made of 100 small doors, and each one seals a little more silence than you notice. Sterile suffering repeats, while fertile suffering moves. The least of things with a meaning outweighs an entire evening of things without it, and the shy animal at the edge of the clearing only ever needed the noise to stop. And when you place all 6 of these next to one another, you find they were never 6 separate lessons at all. They were 6 turns of the very same key, and that key is simply this. The object in your hand was never the point. The empty minute you keep refusing to sit inside was always the point. Every key here has only been asking you to give that minute back to yourself. I make the unconscious conscious. So the next time your hand moves toward the glow without your permission, let it pause there just once and ask, gently, not with judgment, what am I actually avoiding right now? And see if you can bear to find out.